Appreciate you enjoying lunch with us and staying through that. Thanks, Meg and Melissa, Low Health Partnership, for the lunch. And we're going to go right on into our next presentation. We thank Steve Burgess from Green Trees for being here. I'll let him introduce himself further and outline their model of doing business as well.
Thank you guys for the opportunity to speak to you today. Let's tell you a little bit about myself. I worked for the Forestry Commission for 35 years of my life. Like to starve to death, but I love my work. And I retired from Forestry Commission in 12, and I was retired a week, and I've been with Green Trees for 10 years now. You guys are going to hear, you've heard two presentations today from the doctor in the native states, and I guess we're all going to talk about the same terms, it looks like. So Green Trees is a little bit different. Green Trees was established in 2003 by a gentleman named Chandler Van Boris and Carrie Crane. Carrie Crane's name doesn't mean anything to you. That's Maggie Bryant's son. Miss Maggie Bryant was one of the great pioneer conservation ladies we had in our country. And they own Terra Wildlife, if that means anything to you. So Carrie fell in behind his mother, and they had a radio program up in the Plains, Virginia, brokered into this company called Green Trees. The project was established in 2008. Our carbon is registered through the American Carbon Registry. Every acre of our carbon is certified and verified. And we sell it on the Winrock Exchange. We are a volunteer company, meaning, and I may treat y'all like one of my landowners I sit down with and I'm trying to convince them to sign a contract with me. Meaning that we cannot send checks out until somebody buys our carbon. And we get it certified and verified, put on the market. We got 1 million tons on the market, and somebody comes along and buys 400,000 tons, we're gonna send our landowners a check. And when I came to work for them in 2012, our carbon was selling for $4 or $5 a ton. We felt like a tree farm was a heck of a lot more valuable than 50 cents credits out of a garbage dump. So we wouldn't sell our carbon for $1 a ton or $2 a ton. As we all know in the classes we took back in school that tree farm is providing homes for wildlife, it's taking care of our soils, it's taking care of our water. We felt like that tree farm was a whole lot more valuable than some of those 50 cents a ton credits. Today, our carbon is selling in the mid-20s, and that's probably the reason these companies are popping up. In January 1 of 2013, I want to tell this story. We started signing up existing planted acres in WRP and CRP. All of our contracts are piggybacked off of CRP and WRP. And as I continue this presentation, I want to mention the fact that I don't bash NRCS. The CRP program and the WRP program, that 12 by 12 and the 302 trees per acre meets their guidelines wholeheartedly. And but the forester comes out in me. And I planted the first CRP tract in '87 in Sunflower County. So I can go back and look at that tract today that's 35 years old, and it's not very appealing to me as a forester. It's short, it's squatty, it's limmy. And I mean, Kevin Nam would probably stand up and tell you they're going to start thinning these things because to me, it's almost a biological desert when you talk about wildlife habitat. And I think that's the reason CRP and WRP are going to start thinning these 30-year-old stands. And so Green Trees concept comes along. And I planted some of this back in my day with the state. The old Fetler guidelines of 604 trees to the acre using cottonwoods. As a matter of fact, Green Trees has its own cottonwood nursery. It's managed by a gentleman back there named Bickham Crooks. It's my partner out of Louisiana. And we have the Fetler clones. We paid for them, pushed the stumps up, and moved that clone bank to Louisiana. And we have that clone bank today. 17 different clones from North Carolina to Texas. Drought, heavy clay, all those different when you get into clones. So our concept was to plant to add some additionality. I've seen that word additionality today several times already. And to put some trainer trees in there, or nurse trees, as I like to call them, to enhance that hardwood to go here instead of here. And everything we've got planted pretty much is all for the government programs. And but if I can get in front of the landowner, we're in the new carbon business. Green Trees is. We don't sign up the IFM, we don't sign up pine, we strictly deal in bottom and hardwood. And the story I started telling you, January 1, they turned me loose. We had a forester in Arkansas and myself to sign up some of that already planted 302 hardwoods. And at that time in my forestry life, I never knew anybody that got a check out of carbon. Not a single person that I knew got money out of carbon. They'd signed contracts and kind of got left in the shade. Well, here I come along knocking on the door saying, I want to sign your 5-year-old hardwoods up or 3-year-old hardwoods up. We couldn't go back for 2 or 3 years, I think, at that time. And, you know, we'll take a 20-acre project, or we'll take a 2,000-acre project. We pulled that batch of landowners that I signed up for 3 months, me and my partner. And I'm proud to say, so it's January, February, March, August, we got that carbon certified and verified, and I hand-delivered carbon checks to those clients I signed up, and it made me feel awful good that we were doing what we said we was going to do. And some of them like to fell out when I had them a $15,000 check or whatever I had for them, that they just couldn't believe that we had sold that carbon. And that's how it got started. Now, I've got several contracts to talk to you about today that's changed. And Green Trees has been very good at adopting over the last 20 years. Beckham and I looked at contracts the other day. The first 30 contracts Green Trees signed was a 70-year contract. That's where this stuff started, which is a generation, sure enough. And they signed about 30 of those, and they paid the landowner upfront money, $50 an acre, to establish that 604. And that migrated to the 40-year contract we have today. And a lot of that existing stuff I signed up was on what we call a 1540. It was a 15-year contract with a 40-year monitoring clause. What does that mean? Well, they were smart enough, if it was CRP, if the trees were 3 years old, they were signing a 12-year contract with us, because it matched the CRP contract, which is pretty special. And then if that 15 years is up, if they haven't got any money or don't want to do it again, they don't have to re-up with us. Now, that monitoring clause, what it means to this redneck is that I can monitor those trees, because we've done told the carbon registry that those trees are going to be there 40 years. And if I go out there the next year and it's in cow pastures or back in soybeans, then we're going to owe the carbon registry some carbon, not the landowner. Green Trees is. So that's where that monitoring clause comes in. And we have a different contract today. And I'm gonna roll through some slides here, but the cottonwood concept, and I don't use cottonwood per se as a trainer now, I just use the word trainer. We might plant sycamore, we might plant sweet gum, we might plant cottonwood. And I used to plant some green ash, but I don't do that anymore because of the limbo ash borer. So I don't use green ash anymore with that threat of them killing every ash we got. And I think that's still out there. I ain't know much about it lately, but I think it's still out there coming across the country. And so I don't use ash anymore. So last year I planted 200,000 sweet gum as my trainers. I didn't plant one cottonwood stick, but Beckham planted 1,500 acres last year, 2,000 acres of using some cottonwood. But we do try to enhance that 302 to, it don't matter if it's 435, 453, or is it 604 concept. We would like to have some additionality to those projects if we can. Now, that's where we are. Cottonwood is our Cadillac design. And you guys, it hadn't been talked about much, but diameter, height, trees per acre, species is where you get tons of carbon. Okay, so the more trees you have per acre, obviously the more carbon tons you're going to sequester. And that all depends on site and everything when you get in the forestry world. I have put cotton where it don't belong, and I promise you Mother Nature is going to tell you it don't belong there in about 5 years. And so I try to use site-specific if I'm gonna do cottonwood. Even our government, in the early days, when I started working, they wouldn't plant cottonwood, but they didn't care if we planted it, if we paid for it. And then that's migrated to, you're not putting cottonwood on non-cottonwood soils, which is probably where I should have been with a forestry anyway. Let's run a few slides and go through this. And we are the largest reforestation company. That's the early years I talked about. And Maggie Bryant, she was chairman of the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and her son just took right in behind her conservation efforts. Green Trees, the C2Is just have a bunch of offsets. From Big River, that's our cottonwood company. Forest Green, Green Trees Conservation Plus up in Virginia. They're doing a lot of nutrient bank establishments up there, and those credits are about $10,000, $12,000 a credit. Some of the areas in the Chesapeake Bay. So, we'll go anywhere when it starts talking about planting trees and conservation. I do believe strongly, and one of my beliefs is, we've got this country moving green. Solar panels and windmills is an alternative energy, but a tree farm is what heals this earth of what man or woman or humans put on it. Planting trees is where we need to be on cleaning up our environment. Our country's done a great job of that. The rest of the world is not so good at that, but America's done a great job of cleaning up our environment. We do have over 600 landowners. We've got 133,000 acres of planted trees that we didn't plant. We planted a bunch of them, but Green Trees and our clients have planted 133,000 acres. I want to make that clear. We'll go, from the Alluvial Valley to Alabama, Tennessee, to Virginia. We'll go all over this country. If I find out somebody's planting trees, Beckham and I will go sit down in front of them and see if we can get them in a carbon agreement. And if we can add some trees to it to improve that hardwood stand. Green Trees, we have registered this day, 6,270,000 tons. That stuff is sold from $4 to $25. And lately it's in the mid-20s. Everything my leadership up in Virginia tells me they're projecting $50, $80, $100 a ton. That's just projections going down the road. If it gets $100 a ton, you're starting to see real money, and it might convince somebody to, if they can't get in one of the government programs, to plant trees anyway. But we're not there today, and so we have to piggyback off these government programs because they are getting a check out of that, and that perpetual easement money versus their annual rent out of the CRP payments. This is our 12 verifications we've gone through with our tonnage. Y'all been talked about the verifications. When I do sign up a client, we don't ask them for any money, never ask them for any money. But I promise you, the day we sign them up, it starts costing us money. Verifying and registering carbon is very serious, expensive. That third party that comes in here from California, we pay 100% of that. It's very expensive. And everybody's talked today about the third party verifier. We still do ground plots. We haven't quite accepted the LiDAR imagery yet on calculating our tonnage. So we still do ground plots, and we monument those plots. We have to, with a piece of rebar and a 4-foot piece of PVC. Because if that verifier comes in there and says, Mr. Burgess, I want to see 422, I got to take him to plot 422 because he wants to check our measurements. And I'm telling you, they'll come down here in December, and I'm trying to tell them 2 or 3 things. Don't come down here during the dang rut, and don't come down here during duck season. And they don't understand that up in Virginia, but they come down here when it's flooded and it's cold. And they bring waders, and if that plot's out in that water, they're going out there, y'all take that plot. Well, Steve would take it from the bank. But these guys are very serious. I had one call me last year, just a quick story. Beckham and I meet these guys and haul around the Delta. And Beckham said, this guy wants a 4.5-foot piece of PVC. Would you cut him on? I said, yeah, I'll do that. So when I had that gentleman with me, He set that piece of PVC up to every tree, 4.5 feet from the ground. He made sure the tape was perpendicular. You know, I'm doing, well, I'm grabbing the tape, but that 1/10 of an inch was important to him. And I watched him, he was meticulous. And I'm the dummy on the end of the tape as he's checking my boundaries. And he's pulling and I'm pulling it back. I said, Steve, you ought to cheat here and just let it go another inch, you know, but I wasn't cheating. But he checked, he was very meticulous on what he was doing on his job. And I was impressed with it. And so we do all get third-party check, guys, and we get to use them for 3 years and then they roll over to somebody else. So we can't buy them off, we can't put them in our pocket. And but they do some serious checking on us and everybody else too. I hit something. Okay, bud. These some of the individuals that buy our carbon. I get asked every day, why do these people buy that carbon? Well, I go back to politics a minute, and I mentioned Barack Obama. When he became president, that cap and trade words came out. Y'all remember the cap and trade? Where everybody in this country was mandatorily going to have to offset their carbon print. Well, it didn't pass Congress, but these people do it, I guess, for a feel-good reason, and for the employees and for themselves, but it's not mandatory. They buy this carbon and they're spending a lot of money to come down here in the South and buy carbon in these long growing seasons we have. Because every growing season is a vintage of carbon. And that vintage year, we call it a vintage, I call it a growing season. And but there's so many tons of carbon is accrued in that vintage year. We get that verified and registered, it goes on the market, and somebody's got to buy it before we can send out those checks. And I'll talk about the contract in a minute, because I know you guys are going to have some, y'all have seen a lot of these statements today from Dr. Herbert, and our carbon is through the American Carbon Registry. It is verified. Every acre of that carbon has a serial number. And when I came to work here, I don't think I got trained very well, because I was trying to learn a little bit about carbon credits. And then I heard the word soil carbon. I thought, what the heck is soil carbon? But we do sell soil carbon. And the registry set that at 1.18 tons per acre. Doesn't matter how many trees per acre, how big the trees are, it's 1.18 tons per acre. So when you sign up with us, the landowner, unless we've done some kind of trade, they've already got a 1/2 ton of carbon there. And we can sell it for about 18 or 20 years, soil carbon. And but if I'm gonna furnish them today $150 worth of cottonwood sticks, pay for the labor, we generally trade them out for that 1/2 ton of soil carbon to help cover our costs. In some cases. Y'all saw that graph that she had today about, you know, carbon. When you plant that tree, guys, you got that ton of soil carbon. You haven't got much carbon for 5-10 years. Come on, let's don't play. May have a ton, maybe 2 tons over 10 years. And Bickham is a superb, smart gentleman on the Forest Service simulator, where you can go in and punch in height, diameters, and get trees per acre, and it'll spit out, you know. And over 40 years, we've been working on that. You think you're going to average about 4 tons of carbon over them 40 years. We'll start slow, we'll pick up, and then it's going to level out. And so you're not going to have 100 tons per acre on something that's 40 years old. I'm just being honest. You know, when Kevin called me, I meant to say this. I guess he gave me a compliment. He said, Steve, you know, we want somebody to come represent green trees. I said, well, I'll see if I can get one of the founders to do it. And he said, well, Steve, I'd rather you do it, because when you get through, I know you're going to tell the truth. So I'm telling y'all the truth, and that's what I do to my landowners. I ain't pulling any punches. I tell them what's in that contract, and we're going to go over that in a minute. Y'all have heard the word buffer. Our carbon is split 50-50 with the landowner, minus that 20% buffer. ACR makes us put up 20% of that buffer. So if you got 1,000 tons of carbon, 20% of that 200 going in that buffer. And that's just the insurance for your natural disasters. And so we're really 50-50 splitting 80% of your carbon when you get right down to it. But it does start slow and builds up. This is the verifying process. I'm not going to get deep in this because we went over this a little bit. You know, we still take ground plots, and Beckham and I had some Israelis in here the other day. Their company is called Sea-Tree, S-E-E, Sea-Tree. And well, y'all know not just the Israelis, when they turn 18, the women have to automatically serve 2.5 years, and the men have to automatically serve 3 years in the service. That's their rule of law over there. But these guys learned the LiDAR stuff in the military because they were sharp. But they're trying to sell our company on taking our plots using LiDAR. And then Bickham and I went and we helped him measure out some 50-meter plots the other day, and he had a ground LiDAR, a handheld LiDAR. He was walking the boundaries, and then he was checking. He's unflown it with a Cessna. And now he's checking his ground measurements to see if we can match up pretty good where ACR might accept that methodology. And but we still take plots. That may change. You see, green trees back in the old Fittler days, we can't do what they did because you know Fittler grew cottonwoods 10 years, cut them. And the chips went for quality paper, and the internet killed that business. But those trees coppiced and grew another 10 years, and then they cut them again and turned the hardwoods loose. Well, Green Trees was working with Pat Weber and Emil and a bunch of hardwood foresters over at Stonewall. And what we do today, and back in those days, but I did some of it, Greenwood, and if you see some cottonwood going down 49 South, don't look, because I'd hate to even say I plan to help plant that, but because it's off-site. But that was Glenn Miller put that in the CRP program. But the old theory was you plant your cottonwood, and when they averaged 7 feet tall, you came back planting jokes the next year. Well, Green Tree's theory is we do it all at one time now. We rip it, and we'd love to do 2 or 3 silvicultural practices if we can. And a lot of times we can't because of the program it's in. That's okay. But we plant 302 hardwoods, and then we put cottonwoods in between those hardwoods. So you've got trees 6 by 12, and to get that 604 trees to the acre. And that landowner, if he wants this on his property, he can thin that cottonwood, a third of that cottonwood to extent every 3rd row, second cutting at 17, he can clear cut those cottonwood at 25. And that's all 100% his money. We don't get anything out of the above ground biomass. We just split the carbon away. And, but that's the concept. And before you ask, I know there's some foresters in this room, it's hard to get rid of cottonwood today. We do have a little thinning going on that we hadn't had. So most of the landowners are pretty smart, and they asked me, Steve, can I cut that cottonwood? And I'm being honest with them. No, we're having a hard time moving. So I've been going sweet gum. Because in my mind, 30 years from now, you can do a pallet or a mat or something with that sweet gum that you may not can do with that. That cottonwood's kind of a specialty product. It's tight barked. I don't think they like the chip. They do mix it in with some mixed hardwood sometimes, but they, you know, it's light. And the hauling cost today is just not practical hardly to cut that cottonwood. And I've got a little bit thinning going on this year. Beckham's got one in Louisiana, and you're gonna see a picture of it here in a minute, I hope. But I'm gonna tell a story here. And the reason I'm standing here today is Mike Aller. Some of y'all know Mike. Mike's a forester with NRCS years ago, and I think he's in Murfreesboro. Kevin, where's Mike? I went to a meeting at Tarawa, still representing the state of Mississippi, and Bob Misso got up, who used to be the national WRP coordinator. What was Bob? And Green Trees hired him. And I remember sitting there, and he got to harping on high-grade cottonwoods are going to grow on Tensol clay. I said, all right, Mr. Bob. So me and Mike, we got the soil probes and the pH meters, and we headed to that meeting on this is called the Peaches property. It's 1,100 acres. And these farmers took that out of row crops and put it in trees in our 604 concept. And, but he did it right. He disc it to bare dirt. He ripped it, he cross-marked it. So everything was immaculate. And I don't get to do that today. So me and Mike went over there and we were going to dispute this clay theory. And of course, tensile clay is like our Sharkey clay, I believe. Louisiana folks in here, tensile is like Sharkey, isn't it? I believe. And well, so I went over there and I was impressed because there's the trees 1 year old. There's the trees at 2 years old. And so Steve went over there and 2 years I was working for green trees. And so y'all can laugh at that, but that's when it was 3 years old. So it was taken off on this tensile clay, but to make this story a truthful story, this is right off the main cabin. And now I go back to that property now, and as that elevation goes this way, starts going down, and trees aren't that pretty. And you know, cottonwood is really site specific, and it'll grow on clay soils, no doubt in my mind, but if the hydrology is poor, it does not like it. So I use the word hydrology more than I do soils. If it's poor hydrology, there's no need in us putting it on. I'll just use sweetener. Now, let's talk about contract for a minute and money. We have changed as of last year. I have a contract now. We've gone from that 1540. Now, if you've got trees that are 1, 2, 3 years old, I can sign you up to a 15-year contract. And you're going to be in the 50-50 split program. And I'm not going to get into that Bloomberg article. I'm sure everybody in this room knows about the Bloomberg article. But I can only go back 3 years now on existing planted trees. So I got to get in front of my landowners. And that's what I'm doing this day, trying to find people that are planting trees and talk to them about trainers and see if I can add some sweet gum. Because my young foresters today in Mississippi, for example, most of those plans are 8 by 12, which is 453 trees to the acre. And they don't like to adjust to that. They don't want that other 150. So Bickman, I have to work. He's got some in, I've got some in Arkansas was telling me, Steve, that's too many trees to the acre. Okay, let's do 453 or let's do 435. I'm adjusting to what these guys want, and that's just what I got to do. But now, this new contract is a straight 40-year contract. It's got some options in it. You can choose to play the market for the first 15 years, or I'll guarantee you $20 an acre the first 5 years, $30 an acre the second 5 years, and $40 an acre the third 5 years. That's pretty good money if you go back to what I said about how lack of carbon you have at first 10 years. So for me to pay you $40 an acre, carbon should be selling for 80, and I don't know if it's going to be doing that. But that's where I'm at today. I can guarantee you an annual check, just like a CRP payment, because they ask me all the time, am I going to get a check like the CRP? No, somebody's got to buy our carbon for and send the money. And with this particular contract, you can choose this average of $30 an acre for 15 years. And then after 15 years, you're going in a 50% pool again. So if at 15 years, carbon goes to $100 a ton, you'll just be in the 50-50 split for that other 25 years. But it is a 40-year contract. And I got some landowner just says, I ain't gonna sign a 40-year contract. And as my boss told me the other day, you can't get them all. So that's a pretty good payment, the guaranteed money, if you're on top of CRP and WRP. And it's not gonna make anybody take their land out of row crops and put it into trees at that kind of price, but it's got to be almost off the WRP and CRP still today, till carbon gets $100 a ton. Then maybe we can talk to them about planting trees. But most of my landowners in this delta are smart. They're economically driven. They're not conservation driven. And that's what I tell them up there in Virginia. These guys down here are economic driven. And that's just me being honest. But that's our new contract. And
Steve, y'all still doing the 302?
sir?
Y'all are still doing the 302?
We do. I mean, that's our Cadillac design. If I can get permission from, let's just say it's the WRP track, and it's a sandy soil. they'll do me a soil map. And they'll say, Steve, out of this 520 acres, we got good soils on 320 of them. And they might let me plant cottonwood. And I will do it. And it will not cost the government any money. Whatever the government plants out there with their planting partner, whether it's DU or Wildlife Mississippi or Mississippi Wildlife, those three are the partners. And
I'd like to say that 602 plan, that produces more carbon early. But as any forester knows, eventually those trees get to be so big that you run out of real estate. And you gotta do something to keep, you got the production. So if you back off that number and plant 435, 450, you will get to that same 40-year end of rotation carbon sequestration. It's just shifting when it happens.
well, that's our Cadillac design, but we're not doing a lot of it today. Because most lands are marginal at best, because probably 80% of our open land around this delta is made to grow us some food. And it's either land formed or pivot irrigated, and that's not going in trees. It's just not. And so we're dealing, and you know, our government, outside our military, to me, the WRP and the CRP is the greatest programs we've had, because we're putting back these trees in this delta that never should have been cleared. They were pushed up and burned in the 60s. It wasn't harvested, it was pushed up and burned. And so we have, I don't know, Kevin, how much we put back, 1.5 million acres, you know, 2 million acres, I don't know in the two programs. But it's one of the great things to me the government has done. And I said earlier, I'm not knocking the government because their objectives are met. But as a forester, I don't like what I did 35 years ago. And my brain went 35 years ago, guys. I planted all over. I said, well, the gum's gonna come in here, the ash is coming in here, and the persimmon's coming in here. And it's 100% oak, and it's closed up, and it's short, and it's squatty. And I tried to sell some 2 years ago that was 32 years old, or thin some. The hardwood forester kind of laughed at me, so I can't do nothing with this. Hardwood buyer, he wouldn't touch it. And so I hope Kevin and them start opening them up. And but that's our contract, guys. And the 1540 I was talking about would just be a 50-50 split. If you got 2-year-old trees or you got a landowner. Now, I got 1/3 option for our landowners. If a landowner is AIG, his adjusted gross income is too much, he makes too much money out of CRP, he can't get ranked in WRP, I'll pay up to $500 and I'll plant his trees for him. That's a pretty good deal. If he'll sign a carbon contract with me, I'll pay 100% of the tree planting. And that's hardwood, and we're gonna rip it and spray it and do it right. But if you got anybody in here got a landowner that can't get in these programs, I'll pay up to $500 an acre to plant. And we've got a few of them that have taken advantage on that. And the last one I'm gonna say is anybody I've got under contract, Bickham and I, and we're going through the proper procedures. And through imagery, we're looking at tracks we have. And they mentioned today about looking at what this flooding did in 19 and 20. It hurt these hardwood stands. I've been on them and they're popping and bucking and swelling and dying. But where we've got poor stands, people I've got signed up, I'm going back in there and just walking through with a hand planting crew. I'm not site prepping it, and I'm planting it at my cost, just adding some oaks back in there. And I don't know if I'm gonna live long enough 5 years from now to see if those oaks have come through there. I think they will. The oaks are pretty tough, but those tree planters aren't happy with me when I pull up to a site that's got baccharis and briars, and they have to walk through there and plant those trees. So I am doing that for my clients, and it's a pretty good deal as well. Nobody turns that down. If it's WRP, we've got to ask for a compatible use agreement, and we got to get agreement through NRCS to do that. So I'm not doing anything illegal here, but those are the options I have for the landowners I signed up today. And if carbon keeps going up, we're going to plant as many trees as we can. And I look forward to trying to answer some of your questions here at 1:45. It may generate some questions. I wish I could answer them as I talked. It wouldn't have been quite such a boring talk, but this carpenter business is growing and the competition is good. Competition makes everything better. And, but right now we're still a new forest company. We're in the tree planting business, and that's basically where we are. And that's what Bickham and I do most every day, try to find somebody that's interested in planting trees, and we'll make this contract offer to them. Thank you for your time, guys.